Do you ever wake up one morning and realize the people you raised, the ones you carried, fed, prayed for, have buried every bit of love you ever gave them? Do you ever feel like life has been whispering warnings your whole life, but you were too kind, too soft, too hopeful to listen? Because I do, and I've learned that sometimes betrayal doesn't come from strangers, it comes from the voices that used to call you mama. Before I begin, I want to thank y'all for being here tonight, for listening. It's been years since I've told this story out loud. If you're listening from somewhere quiet, maybe your kitchen, maybe your porch, I'd like you to tell me where you are and what time it is. It helps me picture it, you know? I like to imagine faces when I talk. As for me, I'm sitting on my porch here in Birmingham, Alabama. It's just past sunset. The cicadas hummin', sky all pink and gold, and I'm finally ready to tell you about the funeral. The one I wasn't invited to. My name's Esther Williams, 68 years old, retired nurse, mother of 2, widow, at least that's what they tell me. Funny thing is, I didn't even know I was a widow until 3 days after my husband's funeral. It started on a Thursday afternoon. I remember because I was out watering my begonias. The air was thick, that kind of southern humidity that makes the world smell like wet earth and old secrets. I heard someone call my name from the gate. Esther. Esther, honey, you out here? It was Linda Hayes, my neighbor for over 20 years and one of the few who still stopped by now and then. She looked nervous, like she was carrying something heavy but invisible. She pushed open the gate, came up the steps, and just stood there staring at me. What's wrong, Linda? I asked. You look like you seen a ghost. She swallowed, eyes darting everywhere but at me. Esther, I don't know how to say this, sugar, but Robert's gone. At first I thought she meant gone to the store. Or maybe gone somewhere on his own again. He had a way of disappearing after arguments, staying with our daughter for days. But then Linda's eyes filled with tears. No, baby, she whispered. He passed. His funeral was on Monday. For a second, I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I didn't believe her. Then something inside me cracked so quietly it scared me more than if I'd screamed. They had his funeral? My voice came out dry as paper. Linda nodded, wringing her hands. They didn't tell you? Esther, I thought you knew. I thought Carol must have. I felt my knees give way, and I sat right down on the porch steps. I could smell the damp dirt, the faint scent of the flowers I'd been watering, and all I could think was, my husband died. My husband was buried, and nobody thought I deserved to know. See, Robert and I were married 41 years. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was real. We built this house together, raised 2 children, fought our way through bills, sickness, and seasons of silence. But after he retired, something changed. He grew quieter, more distant. Started spending more time at Carol's, our eldest. Said she needed help with the kids. But I always had a feeling there was more to it. He'd come back smelling like her perfume, sometimes not Carol's, but his new wife's perfume. Yes, I said wife, because what I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn until later, was that Robert had remarried me in his own mind long before the law ever could. The last time I saw him alive, we'd argued about money. He'd been asking questions about the house whose name it was in, where the papers were kept. I remember him saying, "It's better to keep things simple, Esther. You don't need to worry about the paperwork." I laughed then, told him, "Robert Williams, if I've learned one thing from being a nurse for 30 years, it's that details save lives." He didn't laugh back. That night, he left. Said he was staying at Carol's for a few days. That was 6 months ago. And now, standing in my garden, I realized those few days were forever. Linda sat with me for hours that evening. She told me the funeral was quiet, private, just family and a few church folks. Carol had told everyone I was too sick to attend. Too sick? Lord, I hadn't missed a day's walk since last winter. They said you knew, Linda whispered, guilt heavy in her voice. I just stared out at the yard, at the dying light stretching across the grass. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not peace, no, not that. Just numbness. When Linda left, I went inside and made tea. My hands trembled as I poured it, the cup clinking against the saucer. I walked to the living room, sat in Robert's old chair, the one with the worn-out armrest where he'd rest his Bible, and whispered to the empty room, "You could have told me, Robert. You could have let me say goodbye." And then I finally cried. The kind of crying that leaves your chest sore, your body hollow. That night I didn't sleep. I sat up listening to the old clock ticking, each second a reminder that I was still here when he wasn't. And around 3 in the morning, I made a decision. I was going to the cemetery. Not for them, not for the children, but for me. Morning broke gray and heavy. I wore my navy coat Robert used to say it made me look proper. I packed a few white lilies in an old paper bag and walked to the bus stop. The driver, an old friend named Earl, nodded at me. "Morning, Miss Esther. Ain't seen you out this early in a while. Just a little visit." "Earl," I said softly. The cemetery sat on a hill outside town, framed by oak trees and the sound of wind rustling through dry leaves. I'd walked that path 100 times for church funerals, but never for my own husband. When I reached the rows of graves, I scanned the markers until I found it. Robert E. Williams, Jr. The name looked strange. Wrong. Robert never used E. His middle name was Lee, not Edward. I thought maybe it was a mistake, a typo on the stone. But something deep inside me stirred, a whisper that said, "They're hiding something." I knelt down and brushed the dirt from the marble. My fingers traced the dates. Born 1948, died 2023. Those were right, but that middle name, it wasn't. I felt cold, even under the warm Alabama sun. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. "Mrs. Williams?" I turned. A man in a gray suit stood there, holding a folder. He looked like he worked for the funeral home. "I'm sorry to intrude, ma'am," he said. "Are you family?" I almost laughed at the question. "I'm his wife." The man hesitated, checking his papers. "Wife? I thought Mrs. Williams passed a few years ago." I froze. My stomach dropped. "Excuse me?" He looked embarrassed, flipping through his file. "It says here the widow listed on record is Caroline Williams." Caroline, my daughter. For a moment, everything around me blurred: the wind, the birds, the world. It felt like I was falling without moving. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice trembling. He nodded. "That's the name signed on the burial documents." And just like that, I understood. They hadn't just hidden the funeral from me, they had erased me entirely. I left the cemetery without saying goodbye. My feet carried me home, though I barely remember the walk. My hands shook the whole way. At home, I went straight to the old chest where we kept our family papers, birth certificates, property deeds, insurance letters. The folder where Robert's name should have been sat empty. Gone. Every paper gone. There was only one thing left, a small envelope. Inside it, a note, written in Robert's handwriting. "Esther, don't be mad. Carol says she'll handle everything. You'll be fine. That's all. No goodbye, no love. Just a lie dressed as reassurance." I sat there for a long time, the paper trembling in my fingers. Then I said out loud, to no one, "They took my goodbye, but they're not taking my name." That evening, Linda came by again, bringing soup I couldn't eat. I told her everything: the gravestone, the name, the missing papers. Her eyes widened. "Esther, that ain't just cruel, it's criminal." She suggested I go see Mr. Douglas Hayes, a local lawyer she knew. Said he helped widows before when families got greedy. At first, I refused. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want courtrooms or police. But later that night, I sat by Robert's empty chair again and whispered, "Maybe you didn't love me enough to tell me the truth, Robert. But I still got to live with it. And living means standing up for myself." That's when I decided I'd go see that lawyer. Not to fight for money, but to reclaim my truth. The next morning, the sun broke through my curtains like a challenge. I dressed carefully, brushed my hair, and walked to town. My reflection in shop windows looked older than I remembered, but stronger too. When I reached Mr. Hayes' office, he looked up from his desk, surprised. "Mrs. Williams, how can I help you today?" I smiled faintly. "You can help me find out if I'm still my husband's wife, or if I've been buried right alongside him." He frowned, leaned forward. "What do you mean?" I told him everything from the funeral I never knew about to the wrong name on the grave. He listened quietly, his brow tightening. When I finished, he said softly, "Mrs. Williams, I think your daughter forged documents, but we'll find the truth." That night, as I walked home from his office, I felt something stir in my chest, not anger, not grief, just determination. The street lamps flickered on as I reached my gate. I looked up at the stars and whispered, "Robert, wherever you are, I'll forgive you someday. But first, I'm gonna find out what really happened." And with that, I went inside, locked the door, and finally slept. But before my eyes closed, one thought echoed in my mind. They buried him, and they tried to bury me too. They just didn't know I was still alive. You ever sit in a courtroom and realize the people across from you, your own blood, are strangers now? That's what betrayal feels like. Not fire, not thunder, just silence, and a coldness so deep it echoes. Before I begin, I just want to thank y'all again for listening. If you're still with me, tell me where you're listening from tonight. Maybe it's raining where you are, or quiet as it is here in Birmingham. It's late past 9, and the world outside my window smells like wet magnolia leaves. I'm sitting here with my tea again, heart steady this time, because this part of the story, this is where I learned that truth doesn't just show up, it fights its way out. After that day with Mr. Hayes, things moved faster than I expected. He had one of those calm voices, steady, confident. Said, "Mrs. Williams, if your daughter really forged legal documents, we'll find the trail." I remember nodding, but inside I was trembling. For 41 years, I'd been mama to Carol. I'd cleaned her skinned knees, made her prom dress, watched her walk down the aisle, and now here I was getting ready to take her to court. But sometimes life corners you into courage. The first sign of something rotten came when Mr. Hayes pulled the county property records. He laid the file down on his desk, face grim. "Esther," he said, "the house you and Robert owned, it's no longer under your name." I froze. "What do you mean no longer under my name?" "That house was ours for decades," he sighed. "There's a transfer deed filed 3 months before Robert passed. It lists the sellers as Robert and Esther Williams, and the buyer as Caroline Williams." My heart skipped, but I never signed anything. He tapped the page gently. "That's the thing. According to this, you did. I stared at the page. There it was, my name, in crooked cursive, right beside Robert's. Only, it wasn't mine. The loops on the E and W were wrong. Too fancy. Too careful. That was Carol's writing. I'd recognize it anywhere. The world blurred for a moment. I gripped the edge of the desk. She forged it. I whispered, "Myrrh." Hayes nodded. And that's not all. There's also a power of attorney document, filed weeks before his death, giving her control over Robert's accounts and estate. I felt something hot rise in my chest. Betrayal. Not just toward me, but toward her own father. What kind of daughter does that? I muttered. Hayes looked at me gently. One who wanted what wasn't hers. Over the next week, we gathered evidence, copies of my old signatures, proof that I'd been out of town the day the deed was filed, statements from the bank. Every night I'd sit by my window, reading over the papers, my hands trembling between anger and heartbreak. Then came the summons. A hearing was scheduled to clarify ownership of the Williams property and the validity of the will. I couldn't believe it. My own daughter had the nerve to show up against me. The morning of the hearing, Birmingham wore a gray sky like mourning clothes. I put on my best blue dress, the same one I wore to my niece's wedding, and pinned my hair back neat. Linda drove me downtown. She squeezed my hand the whole ride, whispering, "You stand tall, Esther. You've got truth on your side." When we entered the courthouse, my heart twisted. There she was, Carol, standing at the far end of the hallway with her lawyer and her husband. I hadn't seen her in months. She looked tired, thinner maybe, but her eyes were sharp, cold. "Mama," she said when our eyes met, the word sounding foreign on her tongue. "Carol," I answered softly. Why, she didn't reply, just turned away. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, smelling faintly of dust and paper. I sat on one side with Mr. Hayes. Across from me, my daughter and her lawyer shuffled through documents. When the judge entered, everyone rose. "Case number 4821, Williams Estate," the clerk called out. The judge, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked at both of us and sighed quietly. "I hope we can settle this matter with dignity," she said. "Family disputes are always painful." Painful didn't even begin to cover it. Carol's lawyer started first. He painted a picture of a confused old widow me, struggling with memory and needing guidance from her caring daughter. Said Carol had only stepped in to manage her late father's affairs responsibly. Every word was a twist of the knife. Then Mr. Hayes stood, calm, precise. He presented the forged deed, the mismatched signatures, the notarized timestamps. Each piece fell like thunder in the quiet room. When the judge asked if I wished to speak, I stood slowly. My knees shook, but my voice didn't. "Your Honor," I said, "I've spent my whole life taking care of my family. I never asked for much. But if I'm standing here today, it's because someone I love tried to take everything I built and bury me with lies." Carol shifted uncomfortably, eyes flashing. I held up my trembling hand, showing a page. "This is my handwriting," I said, holding a recipe note I'd brought. "That signature on the deed, it isn't mine. My daughter knows it. She's known it all along." The room fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Then came the twist. Myrrh. Hayes called a surprise witness, Ms. Daniels, the notary who'd supposedly authenticated the document. She took the stand, nervous but firm. When asked to identify who signed in front of her, she hesitated. I don't remember seeing Mrs. Williams that day," she said finally. "But Caroline was there. She said her mother couldn't make it, so she signed on her behalf." A ripple of gasps filled the courtroom. The judge leaned forward, her voice cold as steel. So you're confirming that Mrs. Esther Williams was not present when her name was signed? Yes, ma'am. And just like that, the lie unraveled. Carol's lawyer went pale. My daughter sat frozen, eyes darting from me to the judge. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. The judge called for recess. In the hallway, Carol cornered me near the benches. Her voice shook, anger barely contained. You didn't have to do this, Mama. You could have just let it go. Let it go. I whispered. You stole your father's memory. You buried him, and you tried to bury me. Tears welled in her eyes. You don't understand. We needed the money. Mark lost his job. The mortgage. I cut her off. And so you thought you'd sell my home? Forge my name? She looked at me, broken. I thought you'd forgive me. You always forgive. I stared at her for a long time. That's what scares me, Carol. You counted on my love to make it easy for you to do wrong. She said nothing, just turned and walked away, shoulders shaking. Back inside, the judge announced her decision. The evidence clearly shows fraud, she said firmly. The property and estate of the late Mr. Williams remain under legal ownership of Mrs. Esther Williams. Any attempt to transfer or manipulate these assets is hereby void. I closed my eyes, exhaling for what felt like the first time in months. But as I opened them, I saw Carol crying silently beside her husband. And just like that, the victory didn't feel like triumph, it felt like loss all over again. After court, Mr. Hayes smiled kindly. Justice was served. Mrs. Williams. I nodded slowly. Yes, but families aren't court cases. Mr. Hayes, you can't file forgiveness. He looked at me thoughtfully. Maybe not, but you can choose peace. That evening, I walked home alone. The streets were quiet. As I passed the old church, I heard faint singing from inside, an old hymn Robert used to love. Softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling. I stopped by the gate, eyes burning. For a moment, I thought about him, about all the years we had, all the mistakes we made. Maybe he hadn't meant to leave me this kind of mess. Maybe he just trusted the wrong person. I whispered into the night. I found the truth, Robert. But it sure cost me. When I got home, I didn't light the lamps right away. The house felt heavy, but somehow finally mine again. On the table lay the court papers, the restored deed with my name. Beside it, I placed a photograph of Robert, Carol, and me from years ago before everything turned sour. For a long while, I sat in silence, sipping cold tea and listening to the rain start to fall. And somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, I realized something. Justice gives you closure, but forgiveness gives you rest. I didn't know it yet, but that rest would come in a way I never expected. Because just when I thought it was over, when I thought the truth had been buried and dug up again, something else came to my door that changed everything once more. Asterisk, do you know what silence sounds like after a storm? It's not peace, not right away. It's the hum of things broken, learning how to rest again. That's what my life felt like in the weeks after the court hearing. Quiet, but not calm. Like my soul was still sweeping glass off the floor. Before I start, let me thank you for listening this far. You've sat through the heartache, the courtroom, the cracks of a mother's faith. If you're still here tonight, tell me, what's the weather like where you are? Here in Birmingham, the night air's heavy with the smell of rain and red clay. The clock's ticking, the tea's gone cold, and my heart feels both empty and full at the same time. Maybe that's what healing sounds like. A week after the hearing, I got a letter. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Carol's dad. It was short, just a few lines. Mama, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm sorry. I made choices I can't undo. Mark left. The bank's after the house. I don't know where to go from here. Carol. I sat with that letter for hours. My first instinct was anger. How dare she crawl back after what she'd done? But then I saw her handwriting tremble, just like it used to when she was little and scared of spelling tests. And that's when it hit me. She was lost. Not just guilty. Not evil. Just lost. I didn't call her. Not right away. Instead, I prayed for her that night. It wasn't a fancy prayer, just a whispered, "Lord, teach her what love really means." The next morning, I packed a small basket cornbread, soup, and a note that said, "You'll always have a home to start over from, but it's up to you to come home clean." Linda dropped it off at Carol's mailbox. She didn't say a word when she came back, just squeezed my hand. Days turned into weeks. The world went on spinning. The court finalized the property paperwork, everything legally mine again. But ownership didn't bring joy. It just reminded me of all that had been lost to greed and fear. That's when the idea came. I was sitting by the window, watching two neighborhood kids walk to school in the rain. They were laughing, holding a single umbrella between them. And I thought, Robert would have loved that sight. He used to talk about starting a scholarship fund, something small. He'd say, for kids who can't afford to dream big. But life got busy. Money got tight. Dreams got shelved. Now, for the first time, I had the means and the reason to do it. The next week, I met with Mr. Hayes again. "Esther," he said kindly, "what brings you in today? Don't tell me someone else forged your name again." I smiled faintly. "Not this time. Thank the Lord. I came to talk about giving something back." He raised a brow. "You mean donating?" "Not donating," I corrected gently. "Investing. In something my Robert believed in." I told him about the idea, the Robert and Esther Williams Scholarship Fund. A modest start, tied to our old church, meant for local students from working-class families. Hayes leaned back, smiling. "You sure you want to use your share of the estate for this? You could keep it for comfort." I looked out his office window, at the city skyline hazy in the noon sun. "Comfort," I said softly, "comes from peace, not from keeping what should be shared." He nodded slowly. "All right then, let's make this official." And just like that, a new chapter began. Setting up the fund wasn't easy. Paperwork, trustees, approvals, every step felt like walking uphill with a heavy heart. But there was something cleansing about it. Every signature I signed felt like washing the bitterness out of my blood. When it was done, I visited the church office with the final documents. Pastor Jenkins smiled as he read the letter. "Robert would be proud of you, Sister Williams," he said. "You're turning sorrow into service." I smiled faintly. "I just want his name to mean something more than a court file." He nodded. "It already does." Then, one afternoon, Carol showed up at my door. No warning, no call, just a knock, a soft, hesitant one. When I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair was shorter, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked smaller somehow. "Hi, Mama," she whispered. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just looked at her, this woman who used to fit in my arms, who'd once stolen from me, who was still my child. Finally, I stepped aside. "Come in." She walked in slowly, glancing around the living room as if it were sacred ground. The same photos, same curtains, same worn rug, but everything felt different now. We sat across from each other. The silence was thick. Then she broke it. "I know I don't deserve to be here." I nodded. "That's true, but you came anyway." Her lips trembled. I don't want your money, Mama. I just want. She paused, eyes filling. I want you not to hate me. I sighed. The kind that carries a lifetime. Carol, hate's too heavy a thing to carry. I set it down a long time ago. She looked up, surprised. I was angry. I continued softly. But anger don't fix broken things. Truth does. And love, real love, don't die just because you lost your way. Tears ran down her face. I ruined everything. Daddy's memory, your trust, the house. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was cold, shaking. Then start fixing it, I said. Not for me, for yourself. That evening, we ate dinner together for the first time in over a year. The food tasted simple, but the silence between us tasted like grace. When she left, she hugged me tight, trembling. I don't know how to make it right, she whispered. Live right, I said gently. That'll be enough. Months passed. The scholarship fund grew faster than I expected. Local businesses chipped in. The church hosted bake sales. And even the mayor's office sent a letter of appreciation. The first year, 3 students were awarded, one studying nursing, another in engineering, and one young girl who reminded me of Carol at 16, eyes full of fire and hope. When they came to thank me at the church ceremony, I smiled through tears. This isn't mine, I told them. It's borrowed love. I'm just passing it forward. They didn't understand the full meaning, but maybe one day they would. And Carol? She started over too. Found work at a local daycare, went to therapy, even began helping with the scholarship paperwork when I couldn't handle the computer part. Sometimes she'd stay after, and we'd sit on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the pecan trees. Once, she asked quietly, "Do you ever wish you hadn't gone to court, Mama?" I thought for a moment. No, I said. Truth needed a voice. But I do wish love had spoken sooner. She nodded, eyes wet. Me too. One evening, not long after the second round of scholarships were given, Carol brought me a framed photo. It showed her, me, and 3 scholarship students standing in front of the church steps, smiling. Below it, she'd written, "For Daddy, because love is the only thing worth inheriting." I touched the frame, and for the first time in years, I felt peace settle deep in my bones. Sometimes, late at night, I still talk to Robert. Tell him about the kids, about Carol's job, about how the magnolias bloomed early this year. And in those quiet moments, I swear I can almost hear him chuckle, that low, warm sound that used to fill the house. "You did good, Essie." I imagine him saying, "You made it right." And maybe, just maybe, I did. I don't know what forgiveness looks like in heaven, but down here it looks like a table with 2 people trying again. It looks like scholarships with names written in love. It looks like a mother and daughter sitting in the same silence, this time without the ache. So if you're listening tonight, maybe wondering how to let go of something that's eaten you alive, here's what I learned. You don't wait for an apology to start healing. You build peace anyway. You give anyway. You forgive not because they deserve it, but because you deserve rest. The house is quiet now. The rain stopped. And in the stillness, I can almost hear the laughter of those kids, the ones getting their chance to dream. Robert's legacy isn't carved on a headstone. It's living, breathing, learning. And as for me, I finally learned that the greatest inheritance a family can have is a heart that refuses to harden.